homeowner spotted a white, thin animal on her security cameras and couldn't tell at first if it was even a bobcat or something else slipping through the shadows. For weeks, the ghost cat kept circling her home. She had no idea she was seeing one of the rarest animals her state had ever documented. She posted the footage in the Ring camera community. Neighbors responded fast. It looked like an albino bobcat that had been roaming the area for months. But the sightings came with a darker warning. Rarity attracts attention, and not all of it is harmless. Rumors of poachers in the region made her stomach drop. Helping a wild predator is never simple. One wrong move could scare it off for good, or push it into even greater danger. And she couldn't shake one question. Why would a bobcat, an animal that should fear people most of all, keep coming back to her door? Then she finally learned the answer, and it left even seasoned wildlife experts stunned. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The camera had been installed for something ordinary, something predictable, something as American as porch pirates and stray dogs. Marlene Harper had put it up after her husband passed, not because she was afraid of the dark, but because quiet houses make people notice every creak. At 68, a retired nurse with careful hands and a stubborn streak, she liked knowing what moved outside her home in rural Pennsylvania. Deer, raccoons, the neighbor's cat. A fox once, sleek and unimpressed, trotting along the edge of her driveway like it paid the mortgage. So, when the motion alert chimed on her phone at 5:42 a.m., Marlene expected another whitetail or a skunk. Instead, the screen showed something that made her sit straight up in bed, breath catching like it had snagged on a thorn. A cat stood on the blacktop of her driveway, long-legged and wild-bodied, ears tipped with faint tufts. But the coat wasn't tawny, and it wasn't brown, and it wasn't anything she'd ever seen in these woods. It was white, not pale, not dusty, not winter-faded. White like fresh bandages in a hospital drawer. The animal held still, staring directly toward the house as if it could see Marlene through brick and insulation. Its ribs showed, sharp as fingers under skin, and the hips were too bony for anything that lived well. The tail, short and blunt, told the truth her eyes didn't want to accept. That wasn't a stray cat with a bad week. That was a bobcat. Marlene watched the clip 3 times, then a 4th, zooming in until the image broke into pixels. The animal's face looked narrow, wary, and exhausted, the way patients looked when they'd been fighting too long alone. It turned its head slightly, and the morning light revealed pink edges inside the ears and a nose like a faded rose petal. Then it walked forward with a limp that was small but honest, and disappeared off the left side of the frame. Marlene didn't rush outside. She wasn't reckless, and she wasn't naive. A wild cat was still a wild cat, and a hungry bobcat was not a creature anyone should try to pet. But she also couldn't stand the thought of it circling the neighborhood, thin and desperate, while summer heat baked the asphalt. So she did what she'd done her whole working life when she didn't know the perfect answer yet. She started with the simplest kind of help that didn't demand trust. A shallow bowl of water went near the hedge line, not close to the door. A second bowl held a small amount of canned cat food, the plain kind, nothing fancy. And then Marlene stepped back inside, closed the door gently, and sat at her kitchen table with her phone in her hands. She waited like nurses wait, listening for the change in a patient's breathing. Nothing happened for hours. The sun climbed, the day warmed, the driveway baked, and the ordinary animals returned. A squirrel bounced through and left without a glance at the bowls, insulted by the lack of peanuts. At noon, A crow landed near the water, hopped twice, and took a sip like it owned the place. Marlene was beginning to wonder if she'd imagined the whole thing, if the camera angle had tricked her. Then, at 6 p.m., another motion alert chimed. The white bobcat stepped into view again, slower this time, as if the day had hurt. It didn't run at the sight of the bowls. It didn't charge either. It simply stared, muscles tight, body angled for escape, and watched the food with a kind of disbelief. Marlene whispered, though nobody could hear her through the screen. "It's okay, just eat." The bobcat took one step, then froze, head lifting. Even through the grainy camera audio, Marlene could almost feel its attention shift, scanning for danger. Then it moved forward, sniffed the air, and lowered its head to the bowl. It ate fast, not savoring, not trusting the meal to stay. Marlene pressed her hand to her mouth, not from delight, but from worry. That speed wasn't comfort. That was starvation. That night, she posted the clip in the Ring community, not with excitement, but with caution. A white bobcat on a driveway wasn't just a wildlife sighting. It was a neon sign for trouble. She wrote that she wasn't sure what it was, that it looked sick, that she was worried. Within minutes, comments poured in from neighbors she'd never met and names she recognized from block parties. Someone typed, "That's the ghost bobcat people have been talking about." Another wrote, "Rare albino bobcat, seen by the creek for months." A third added, "Trail cam caught it behind the old quarry. It's real." Then came the darker replies, the kind Marlene had hoped not to see. "Be careful. Poachers would pay for that." Marlene's stomach tightened, and she felt suddenly foolish for posting at all. She deleted the exact location from her comments, stopped answering questions, and instead began calling professionals. The Pennsylvania Game Commission office directed her to a local wildlife rehabilitator, and by morning she had a number. When she reached the woman on the other end, the voice was calm and unhurried, like someone who had seen every kind of panic. "Dr. Janelle Brooks," the rehabilitator said, "tell me what you've got." Marlene described the coat, the ribs, the limp, the way the bobcat ate like it expected the bowl to disappear. She explained she'd left water and a small amount of food far from the house, and that she was keeping her distance. There was a pause. Then Dr. Brooks spoke carefully, choosing words like tools. "If it's truly albino or even leucistic, it's at higher risk," she said. "Not just from people, but from sun exposure, poor camouflage, and other predators. You did the right thing not approaching it. Do not try to lure it inside your home. And please, do not tell anyone else where it's coming." Marlene's voice shook despite her pride. "It looks like it's going to die out there." "Not if we handle this smart," Dr. Brooks replied. "We can help without turning it into a pet." Over the next week, Marlene became a quiet guardian of her own driveway. She didn't advertise. She didn't gossip. She didn't turn it into a neighborhood spectacle. She simply followed instructions like she used to follow medical protocols, steady and disciplined. Food went out at dusk, small amounts, never enough to attract a crowd of raccoons. Water stayed fresh. The bowls stayed in the same place, creating consistency without invitation. And when the bobcat appeared, Marlene stood outside at a distance, not reaching, not advancing, just existing. She spoke softly, not in baby talk, but in the low, reassuring tone she'd used with frightened patients. "It's just water," she'd say. "It's just food. Nobody's coming for you here." Her hands stayed visible at her sides. Her eyes stayed gentle but alert. She never blocked the animal's path, never stood between it and the woods. At first, the bobcat bolted whenever she opened the door, a white flash vanishing like a bad dream. Then, slowly, it began to pause before running, as if curiosity tugged on it like a loose thread. It would stand at the edge of the driveway, ears forward, watching Marlene's silhouette. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't tame. It was simply learning that this human did not chase. That fragile progress nearly shattered on a Thursday afternoon when Marlene's neighbor, Rick Donnelly, walked over uninvited. Rick was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, a hunter who talked about coyotes like they were personal enemies. He leaned on Marlene's low retaining wall and nodded toward her security camera. "Seen that white cat again?" he asked, too casually. Marlene's heart beat harder than it should have. "I've seen wildlife, same as anyone." Rick smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "People are saying it's worth a fortune. Albino bobcat, you know. You're lucky if it's on your land." "It's not mine," Marlene said, voice firm. "It's wild." Rick shrugged. "Wild things get taken all the time. If it's sick, it might be better off somewhere else." Marlene felt an old kind of anger rise, the kind that used to surface when someone mistreated a patient. But she didn't snap. She didn't lecture. She simply said, "It's being handled by professionals," and watched Rick's eyebrows twitch. "Professionals," he repeated, like the word left a bad taste. "Sure." After he left, Marlene called Dr. Brooks again, and this time she didn't hide the fear in her voice. "Someone is asking questions," she said. "I think he's thinking about trapping it." Dr. Brooks didn't hesitate. "Then we move faster," she replied. "I'll bring a humane box trap and we'll do it right." The plan was simple, the kind of plan built on patience instead of drama. A baited trap placed near the feeding station, camouflaged with brush, checked constantly, never left unattended too long. If the bobcat entered, it would be transported immediately to Dr. Brooks's facility for evaluation, hydration, and a full workup. If it didn't, they would keep building trust, because forcing a wild animal too soon could turn fear into injury. But nature and humans rarely stick to anyone's plan. On Saturday morning, before Dr. Brooks could arrive, Marlene woke to frantic barking and the sharp, ugly sound of metal scraping. She looked out her kitchen window and saw movement near the far end of her driveway, close to the tree line. The white bobcat was there, twisting, body low, foreleg caught in something. It wasn't the humane trap Dr. Brooks had described. It was a snare, the kind that tightens when panic pulls. Marlene's knees went weak. Her hands moved anyway, trained by decades of emergency reflex. She grabbed her phone, dialed 911, then stopped and dialed Dr. Brooks instead. Because this wasn't a heart attack. This was worse, because the patient could bite and run and die in the woods where nobody could help. Dr. Brooks answered on the second ring. When Marlene choked out what she saw, the rehabilitator's voice turned sharp as snapped twigs. "Do not go near it," Dr. Brooks said. "Keep your distance. Talk softly if you must, but do not approach. I'm calling the game warden now." Marlene stood at the window, crying silently, watching the bobcat fight the snare with desperate strength. Every pull tightened the wire, and the animal's breathing became ragged. It wasn't attacking. It wasn't acting wild with rage. It was acting wild with terror, and terror makes everything dangerous. Minutes later, a truck rolled into Marlene's driveway with the seal of the state on the door. Officer Miguel Santos stepped out, calm and quick, followed by Dr. Brooks in her own vehicle. They moved like a practiced team, not rushing, not startling, reading the Bobcat's body language like a map. A catch pole, a thick towel, heavy gloves, and steady voices. Dr. Brooks spoke the way Marlene had spoken all week, low and certain. "It's okay," she said. "Nobody's hurting you. Let us help." The Bobcat's eyes were wide, pale in the morning light, and it pulled again. Then froze, trembling, as if it had reached the end of its strength. Officer Santos eased closer, kept his body turned slightly sideways to look less threatening. Dr. Brooks slid the towel forward, creating a dark cave of fabric that calmed the animal by reducing what it could see. In one smooth, controlled motion, they stabilized the leg, cut the snare, and guided the Bobcat into a secure carrier. The instant the carrier door clicked shut, the driveway went silent except for Marlene's shaking breath. That silence didn't feel like victory. It felt like the pause after a near tragedy. Officer Santos examined the snare, then looked at Marlene with a hard expression. "This wasn't accidental," he said. "This was set." Marlene's voice was barely a whisper. "Rick, I can't accuse without evidence," Santos said, "but I can investigate." His gaze shifted to the camera mounted above the garage. "And you might have more evidence than you think." Marlene's hands went to her phone again, pulling up footage, scrubbing backward through time. At 2:13 a.m., the camera caught headlights near the road, a truck moving slowly without turning into any driveway. At 2:16 a.m., a figure walked along the tree line, pausing near the feeding station. The face wasn't clear, but the body shape, the gait, the cap. Marlene recognized them like she recognized an old fear. Officer Santos nodded once. "This helps," he said. "A lot." Then Dr. Brooks opened the carrier just enough to check the Bobcat's condition, and something unexpected happened. The animal didn't lunge. It didn't slam itself against the crate. It pressed back into the corner, shaking, and made a sound so small it barely existed. More breath than growl. Dr. Brooks leaned closer, her expression shifting from urgency to puzzled focus. "Hold on," she murmured. "Look at the ear." On the Bobcat's left ear, hidden under white fur, was a faint mark. Not a natural scar, not a torn notch from fighting. A small tattoo, bluish and deliberate, the kind used for captive identification. Marlene's mouth fell open. "That means—" Dr. Brooks nodded slowly. "This cat has been handled before," she said. "And not by a rehabber doing releases. This looks like illegal captive trade." The words hit Marlene like ice water. All week she'd been imagining a rare wild bobcat born like a miracle in the woods. A ghost cat, surviving on instinct, struggling against nature. But this mark suggested something crueler and more human than any harsh winter. Officer Santos's jaw tightened. "Then this isn't just poaching," he said. "This is evidence of a bigger problem. And if that's true—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Marlene understood anyway. If the bobcat had escaped captivity, it might not know how to hunt well. It might be seeking humans not for friendship, but because humans had been its whole world. That would explain the driveway appearances, the lingering, the way it watched the house like it remembered doors. Marlene felt sick, not because the bobcat was less magical, but because the truth was uglier. A rare white coat didn't just attract wonder. It attracted ownership. It attracted greed disguised as fascination. Dr. Brooks loaded the carrier into her vehicle, then paused and looked at Marlene seriously. "You did something important," she said. "You gave it a safe place without making it dependent." Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "But I want you prepared for something else." Marlene swallowed. "What?" Dr. Brooks's eyes softened. "Wild cats don't keep coming back like that unless there's a reason," she said. "And sometimes the reason isn't hunger. Sometimes it's responsibility." Marlene didn't understand until 2 nights later, when the storm rolled in and the power flickered. Rain hammered the roof, turning the yard into a dark, wet blur beyond the windows. Marlene sat with a flashlight and a battery radio, thinking about the bobcat in a rehab cage, frightened and alone. She tried to tell herself the animal was safer now, even if it didn't feel that way yet. Then her phone buzzed with a notification from her back camera. Marlene frowned, because the bobcat was gone. But the camera didn't show a bobcat. It showed movement near the retaining wall, close to the drain pipe by the steps. A small shape, then another. Low to the ground, darting, slipping in and out of the rain. Marlene leaned closer to the screen until her eyes burned. 2 kittens. Not domestic kittens. Not by their bodies or their gait. Bobcat kittens, small enough to look like a child's stuffed animals dropped in the storm. Their coats were normal, mottled brown with faint spots, but their faces were sharp and their ears were too big for their heads. They were trying to climb out of the drainage culvert and they couldn't. Marlene's throat tightened so hard she could barely breathe. Dr. Brooks's words came back like a bell. Sometimes the reason isn't hunger. The twist landed with brutal clarity. The white bobcat hadn't been haunting the neighborhood because it wanted a home. It had been searching for help, circling closer and closer to the only place that felt safe enough to risk. And now, in the worst weather, the reason had surfaced. 2 babies trapped where rainwater could rise fast. Marlene didn't run outside alone. She didn't do the heroic thing that gets people hurt. She called Dr. Brooks immediately, and then Officer Santos, and she turned on every outdoor light she had. She spoke from the doorway, voice steady and loud enough to carry through rain. "It's okay," she called. "Stay there. Don't move. Help is coming." The kittens cried, thin sounds swallowed by thunder. Marlene watched water swirl near the culvert, and every minute felt like a coin being spent from a limited pile. Dr. Brooks arrived first, hair plastered by rain, carrying equipment like a medic rushing into chaos. Officer Santos pulled in behind her, and together they approached the culvert with caution and speed. Bobcat kittens could bite, and a protective mother, if she was nearby, could explode from the dark like a thrown knife. But the mother wasn't nearby, and that absence was its own heartbreak. Because the mother, the one with the white coat and the tattooed ear, was sitting in a rehab facility miles away. And if those were her kittens, she wasn't choosing to abandon them. She was being kept from them. Dr. Brooks knelt by the culvert, shining a light inside. The kittens huddled against the pipe wall, soaked and shivering, eyes wide with panic. She worked carefully with a small net and thick gloves, speaking softly even as rain drenched her shoulders. One kitten came out, wriggling, spitting, furious at the world. The second tried to climb, slipped, and nearly fell back into the rising water. Marlene's hands clenched at her sides until her fingers ached. She didn't touch the kittens. She didn't scoop them up like a grandmother with grandchildren. She stayed back, because love for wildlife isn't proved by contact. It's proved by restraint. When both kittens were finally secured in a warm carrier with towels, Dr. Brooks looked up, rain dripping from her eyelashes. Her face held something that wasn't just relief. It was grief. "These are hers," she said quietly. "I'm certain." Marlene's voice cracked. "So she was coming here for them?" Dr. Brooks nodded. "And she trusted you enough to keep coming back," she replied. "Not because she wanted your house, because she wanted her babies alive." That was the moment the story turned from strange to unforgettable, from rare to sacred. A wild cat, exploited by humans at some point, still carried the oldest instinct in her body. Protect the young. Find safety. Do whatever it takes. Dr. Brooks drove the kittens back to her facility, and for the first time, the plan changed. Instead of keeping the white bobcat isolated for a slow recovery, Dr. Brooks prepared a quiet, darkened enclosure beside her. The kittens were warmed, rehydrated, checked for injuries, and placed in a den box with scent transfer to reduce stress. Then Dr. Brooks did something that was both risky and necessary. She introduced the mother's scent, then allowed the mother to hear the kittens. The white bobcat reacted like lightning under skin. She paced, she huffed, she pressed her face against the enclosure barrier, eyes fierce with desperate focus. But she didn't attack the cage. She didn't fling herself into panic. She listened, ears swiveling, body vibrating with the need to reach what mattered most. When Dr. Brooks finally opened the den box and allowed contact, the room seemed to hold its breath. The kittens crawled forward, unsteady, and the white bobcat leaned down, nose touching them with trembling precision. Then she began to groom them, fast and frantic at first, then slower, calmer, as if her body was finally convinced. They were real. They were alive. They were hers. Marlene heard the update the next morning, and she sat at her kitchen table and cried into her coffee. Not because she wanted the bobcat to love humans, or because she wanted to be part of something viral. She cried because the mother had done everything right and still almost lost everything. And she cried because for once, the ending didn't have to be another quiet tragedy in the woods. Over the next month, Dr. Brooks and Officer Santos worked two parallel cases. Dr. Brooks focused on rehab, healing the snare injury, correcting dehydration, rebuilding muscle with appropriate diet and enrichment. No cuddling, no hand feeding, no turning a wild animal into a storybook character. Just careful, professional steps aimed at returning a predator to the life it was meant to live. Officer Santos focused on the human side, using the camera footage, local tips, and the tattoo evidence to dig deeper. The investigation didn't stay small for long, because illegal wildlife trade rarely stops at one animal. As for Marlene, she became something she hadn't expected in retirement. Not a hero, not a celebrity, not a woman who tamed a wild cat. She became a witness, a protector of privacy, and a reminder to her neighbors that rarity isn't an invitation. When people in the ring community asked for updates, she gave them just enough. The animal is safe. Professionals are handling it. Please don't go looking. And then, late one August evening, Dr. Brooks called with the kind of news that carries sunlight in its voice. "The mother is strong," she said. "The kittens are thriving. They're hunting live prey in a controlled setting, staying wild, staying wary. It's time to move them to a release site with monitored protection." The release wasn't done in front of a crowd, and it wasn't done for applause. It happened on protected land in the state forest, with thick cover, water access, and minimal human traffic. Officer Santos fitted the mother with a tracking collar designed to drop off later, a temporary thread back to safety. The kittens, old enough now to move with confidence, stayed close but not clingy, already practicing independence. Marlene wasn't invited to touch them or to stand close. She stood back with her hands in her jacket pockets, watching from a respectful distance. The white bobcat stepped out first, coat glowing softly in the last light. Not beautiful in a decorative way, but beautiful like a hard-won survival. She paused, head turning, eyes scanning the woods with the seriousness of a creature that had learned too much too soon. Then she looked once toward the humans, not with affection, not with gratitude like a movie would demand, but with awareness. Dr. Brooks's voice was quiet. "That's as much as anyone should ever ask for," she said. The white bobcat moved forward, and the kittens followed, and within seconds they melted into the trees. No dramatic music, no lingering pose, just wildness reclaiming itself. Weeks later, Marlene's driveway camera caught something again at dawn. Not the bobcat on the asphalt this time, not the ribs and limp and desperation. It was a glimpse at the edge of the yard, near the tree line, a white flash passing behind ferns. Two smaller shadows moved with it, then all three vanished without offering proof they'd ever been there. Marlene watched the clip once, then set her phone down and smiled through tears. Because the unbelievable part of the story was never the rare coat. The unbelievable part was what happened when a frightened wild mother chose the least likely strategy in the world. She chose patience over panic, and she chose a careful human over a dangerous gamble. And that choice, made in quiet steps on a plain American driveway, gave three wild souls their second chance.